make sure my mother does not appear in the picture. Is it okay?
No, she's not in.
Okay, that's fine.
Just in.
It's okay. That's fine. We began our study of the last 6 chapters of Sri Aurobindo's book, The Life Divine, last Sunday. And our purpose in this, we can reiterate. In these last 6 chapters, Sri Aurobindo summarizes the broad framework of the effort of the integral yoga and the passage of transition into the new consciousness upon which a new humanity has to be established, and the collective forms and life of that humanity that need to be developed through that passage. This we have taken up with a certain urgency of focus for each one of us in the present circumstances of life. There is a demand to be able to rise above our present state of consciousness and evolution, in order, if nothing else, simply to survive the pressures of present life, but more urgently the necessity for that transition for the human race as a whole. Rather than beginning with these 6 chapters, we took a step behind to the chapter just before, and the end part of it, titled Rebirth and Other Worlds. And the reason for this is so that we may understand more deeply the distinction between the true person that we are and the personality which is this on the surface that we think ourselves to be, in order that we may harmonize these two sufficiently to allow for a continuation across lives of this sense of purpose and effort for which we are here. And this was the reason why we took a part of this chapter for our study. Here, in the portion that we have not read, Sri Aurobindo has already discussed the broad sense of karma and its role in the development of personality. And the portion we read last time, he makes a distinction between the soul which is permanent within and the personality which it puts out for the purpose of life experience. And he says the idea that a person so born must now take the same personality into the next life is not only irrational but also very simplistic from the perspective of evolution. For the purpose of evolution, what is put out is a new personality in which a completely new experience can be had. And across lives, the true soul, the true person within, puts forward completely different personalities as necessary for the line of experience that it has chosen. For example, at a certain phase of human development, there was great possibility of experiences for development of heroism and courage. And a personality would be put out appropriate for that kind of experience and development. And having exhausted the possibilities of development, then the soul may say, but now I want to experience a life of service, of quietness, of deep introspection and inner concentration rather than external conquest and achievement. But a personality which is driven to surface dynamic expression is not useful for that kind of life. And so it sets aside those tendencies, brings forward other tendencies from its inner store, forms a new personality suited for this, and has that life experience. Now, across a series of lives, different kinds of personalities put out, each one is as if reabsorbed in its essence, not in its details. In the portion we have already read, he explains how, in passing from the body, for a while the same vital and mental layers of the subtle bodies may remain, and then even those dissolve. The moment you have shed the physical body, everything tied to the physical body would also be dropped. Imprints and impressions which were received in the physical body but received by the inner consciousness would be retained as impressions and imprints only. So in a new life, in a new birth, I may find that somehow I have a natural skill for playing a certain instrument. And what is retained is not the personality, but the impression in the physical consciousness of that skill. But only as an impression. I still need to train to make it perfect. Similarly, when the vital body is shed, the elements of the vital personality and its human relationships, those also fade out. In the act of leaving from the physical body, at first the soul may look and feel the closeness of personal relations with those you have left behind. But as that layer dissolves, even that fades, and you feel those relationships fade away until practically nothing remains of that except the imprint and impression of the sharing of experiences of love, of affection, of caring, sharing. And occasionally, if there was a deeper link of the soul relation with another, something of that may remain also. And the same with the mind's formations being dissolved. All the rich training that you have made of your intelligence, of the specifics of knowledge, of specifics of information, all these fade away. What remains is the overall imprint of the skill and the capacity, the pliability, the flexibility that the mind has developed, the skill of handling knowledge and analyzing or synthesizing, developing insights, the intuitivization that has taken place in the mind. These would remain as imprints or quality of consciousness. And this would remain in the soul as it absorbs the overall imprint of the life and goes into a state of rest. We discussed last time on the return, it puts out some elements of this, drawing out what is necessary for the purpose of the life. Sri Aurobindo points out, essential elements of the past may be kept, but some will be kept, some may not be used in the next incarnation. And as it draws out elements, it has the full store of all impressions from all past personalities which are available. Of that, whatever is relevant is drawn out to form the new shape of the personality. But it will not be a replica of the old personality. It can even be completely opposite, completely different tendencies. or potentials may be ready to emerge, or something already in action but inchoate may have been held back in the last life, which needed to be worked out but was kept over for a later and more suitable combination of the possibilities of the nature. Things like this, which were worked upon, taken as far as they could at that time, but then were left waiting for a greater opportunity, those come forward. As an example, if you watch children today playing with computer screens or tablets or mobile phones, it is surprising at the pace at which they pick up the skill of using these devices, and what older adults find difficult to learn, they catch on their own without you needing to teach anything. It shows that at some past stage of human development, the possibility of the mind rapidly using such devices or developing such skills had been taken as far as it could with the tools available then, and now that possibility comes up with new terms, new forms, new technologies, but the same skills rapidly developing, building upon the past to capture them. Sri Aurobindo has a very suggestive observation in the same text of the Life Divine, in its earlier chapters. He says, if you observe how humanity has rapidly picked up the power of the intellect in the last, let's say, 100 or 200 years, humanity as a whole, you cannot explain this merely by the current idea of small evolutionary steps. If you go back barely 200 or 300 years ago, the people who had developed the power of the intellect to some extraordinary degree were very few, and they were looked upon as an elite. And yet in the last 100 years, people coming out of traditions which have completely neglected or lost the training of the intelligence, they come out, and within a generation or two, suddenly you pick up the same equal skill of intellect as anywhere else on earth in large masses. How do you explain that? And he says you have to go back to an earlier phase of human evolution where the intelligence was taken to a degree of development similar to the present. And then it had moved on to an intuitive age, and in the intuitive age something was left as if incomplete, and the human evolutionary surge dropped back to pick up once again and integrate with the rational mind. So what we pride ourselves on today as the modern development of intelligence, which you see so widespread, is only a picking up of something developed. And if you look at the cycles of time, it could be about 10 or 12,000 years ago, before that intuitive rise. And in fact, we are catching up with an earlier stage of evolution, if anything, except we are now more deeply integrating the intellect into the intuitive. And imagine what it means for the soul. We have prepared certain lines of experience then, and then they had to be set aside while other lines developed because of lack of opportunity. And then again it's brought forward, and those elements from 10,000 years ago come forward, other elements from the last 5 or 1,000 years, 500 or 1,000 years, elements relevant for the present. Almost all of us present here have had lives dedicated to a spiritual pursuit. We would not find ourselves so inclined with this kind of commitment if that was not the case. Those lives have been through ascetic phases of complete withdrawal from the world. They've been through phases of rich devotional outpouring of various kinds across many traditions or cultures or even religions. We have had phases where the same spiritual turn might have taken a very different form from the devotional, in taking a form of pure service or deep intellectual pursuit. And all of these elements, imprints, those tendencies of consciousness are as if there behind to be drawn forward by the soul in forming the present mold of the personality. How much is available would determine the richness of possibilities in this lifetime. It doesn't mean everything is brought forward. And here we come to a very important idea that he says, all the past is indeed there, but its accelerated impetus and potentialities for the formation of the future. But all of it is not ostensibly present and active. So it's all there, you don't have to bring it all in front. This ostensibly present and active, it's a very interesting word. If we view it in the modern understanding, ostensible is what you put up as a front, as a pretense, as an appearance, but not what is real. What is pretentious but unreal as compared to what is behind. But if you go to the root, and Sri Aurobindo, remember, is a master of Greek and Latin, you have to go to the root of the word ostensible, and it comes from the Latin ob and tendere, that is in front, extended, stretched out. Now you read the same sentence, ostensibly present and active, stretched out in front. So from the personality's side, all this is behind, and stretched out in front is a selection of possibilities, which forms your present personality, to which is given an accelerated push forward for future formation. Remember, from the soul's perspective, the past does not matter. What matters is what is developed from it, relevant for the future. And he will be discussing this shortly. But for our purpose now, for this life and the work to be done, the rich base built up is essential. And he gives you now an extraordinary statement. It's a rich and complex statement with 4 different characteristics that he describes, all of which prepare us for the new breakthrough in evolution. The greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized, first. The more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience, second. The more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new births. Fourth. All these things, the more they are there, the more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. The greater and more opulent will be that personality, and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. Now you see the whole thrust of this evolutionary effort across lives. It is in order to complete the mental evolution as thoroughly as possible, preparing for a still higher spiritual step in evolution. And for this, the personality possibilities in front should be greater and more opulent, and that makes it also nearer to the possible transition out of the mental stage into the higher supramental evolution. Sri Aurobindo has used this word opulent. The greater and more opulent will be that personality. And again, opulent we understand very loosely to mean rich and wealthy. But if you go back to the Latin root, it has a very specific sense. The op is a similar root as opus, which is work. And opulent, which gives the sense of abundance, is tied to the work which leads to abundance. So you go back to the root, opulence has the sense to work hard to produce great abundance. You see the word usage of this word now, all the work of the past is that hard work. How many millions of years perhaps that the journey has been going on, of which we remember nothing here on the surface. All that hard work is behind working or present now to produce this rich possibility in the present. And so let's review what are those large 4 facets that he describes, which make us ready for the new step in evolution. First, he said, the greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized. So it would be quite a meaningless journey if the soul had kept a very narrow range of possibilities. If you look at your personality today, and that's the limitation of the personality, you fear so many things. If you were asked now, would you like to go bungee jumping? Would you like to go climb Mount Everest? No, that's not for me. Let's let those courageous people do it. I don't like to risk my life. That's this personality. And the soul could put forward a personality which says, oh yeah, I would love to do that. And that personality and its explorations and the essence of that adventurousness, if it has been worked on, is actually available for this life, or is an aspect which fills this life. Although in this personality I may not like to go climb Mount Everest, that adventurousness may take a different form in my mind's explorations, in my heart's relations, in a person who's a businessman taking a leap in an unknown field of creation. But the same tendency, the same power of consciousness and richness developed is available. So across those lives, to have made as broad and rich a tapestry of development possible would make you prepared for the step beyond in evolution. And he says very subtly, the greater the variety of formations, it's not how many lives you had, it's the variety of range here. And how much of that can be utilized for the present. You see, some of it may not be sufficiently developed to be brought forward to be utilized. Just having bungee jumped once is not enough to create and develop an imprint of the adventurousness. The second characteristic, the more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience. And so the soul necessarily will have gone through many different kinds of cultures across time, experienced different types of ways of thinking, ways of relating, ways of living. And that range and that variety accumulated together to build the experience. And third, the more their essential result of capacity. I may have gone through a very hard life, but have I developed the capacity now to overcome in the face of challenges? Maybe I slipped. Have I overcome at some point eventually? And if so, that remains. Now this is something very important that the mother has observed in a different context. She says, if you observe in life, it's easy to find joy in satisfying your desires. I feel like having ice cream, I feel like doing this, or hitting somebody, or doing some mischief. You feel an impulse of desire, you follow, you satisfy, you have some joy of it, whatever duration, brief, superficial character. But she says, far greater is the joy of being able to overcome the desire. And this is something interesting. When you have actually struggled with a desire that came and you knew it was not quite the best, it was not the best time or the best form, or even the desire was somewhat perverse, instead of giving in to it, if you have actually been able to hold and rise above the desire, and been able to do something which frees you even from that attachment to the desire, the joy that it gives is the character of the joy of the soul, having conquered something, having taken a step forward in consciousness, having developed a new capacity which was not there before. And this will stay. This will be carried by the soul into the next life. The momentary satisfaction of desires has no value in itself and will leave no imprint that is worth keeping. And so the things where you have overcome and conquered and developed a capacity of growth, of mastering, or at least managing what? And he gives a range of facets of life experience. The more the essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, and last, manifold response to the universe. Each of these needs to be explored. The capacity for knowledge. Now, all of us have a capacity for knowledge. How much is that capacity? You will, of course, go back to the stage in school where most of us ended up spending a lot of wasted time because of the nature of the system of education. And if there you got poor marks, it is not a measure of your capacity of knowledge. That's only a measure of your memory. Your capacity of knowledge you can measure, in my opinion, best by reading Sri Aurobindo. And when you first start reading, it's as if your mind is stretched. And you say, oh, this is too difficult. But you keep at it. Keep at it for a few weeks. And then you look back and say, oh, now I'm beginning to understand what was earlier difficult. Keep at it for a few months, and suddenly now the understanding begins to flow, almost effortlessly. What has happened is your actual capacity of mind has been drawn out and stretched to the full that it is currently capable. That would be a measure of your real capacity of knowledge. And you may think at that point that you've understood everything, but after a year when you reread the same passage, you'll say, oh, there's so much more. It's as if I had not read it before. Now I understand it more deeply. And you're experiencing the capacity of knowledge to be stretched. And the nature of the knowledge, you will realize it's not how much you remember. It's what you're able to hold as an experience in the mind of knowing yourself, the world, and your relationship with the world. And this is the true sense of capacity of knowledge. And so when a soul has developed that, you may find in early childhood what is possible is not really drawn out because of the nature of life and the educational system. But if you take the trouble now to exercise it, the real work done in the past will come forward. Capacity for power. And again, it's something which most of us have not had an occasion to develop. I've seen examples of people in their mid-50s, at a time when most people are now already planning for retirement, having had a life, in this case, an example that comes to mind is of a woman who had spent all her life looking after the children, looking after family and relatives, and pretty much not having done anything outside the domain of that space of house and looking after others. And at that point, she was taken, maybe in her 60s, out of that space and given responsibility for a large organization. And what you saw was exceptional. The family space was an organizational challenge, but a very narrow and limited challenge. Here was a much larger life space, and you saw the person literally decompressing her capacity for management and leadership, and suddenly opening up and all these powers flowing. You cannot explain that as something developed purely from looking after her family. It's obviously something developed from past lives, and an opportunity given here gave a chance for its deployment. And obviously the soul had come with that capacity relevant for this life, but the opportunity was not given. What does it mean for all of us? Again, it means if we get a chance, do take an opportunity that comes your way, exercise whatever capacity you have, to whatever extent, deploy it, decompress it. And having done that, you may find no more interest in pursuing that line of activity, but at least it's available now externally in your personality. Third is action. The power, exercise of power is one thing, getting into specifics of action and finishing, making perfect specific action. Now again, it's a very broad word, but it can take many forms. I remember a child who came here at the age of 2, and there was a lecture here, Panditji was giving a class, and many people had put their slippers outside, and this 2-year-old girl, she couldn't follow what was being spoken, so she wandered around. And by the time we came out, we saw she had arranged all the slippers and shoes in a neat row, beautifully. Now, what is it as an impulse in a 2-year-old child that wants to arrange slippers neatly? And obviously, it's something coming from the past, a sense of aesthetics, a sense of order and harmony, and spontaneous expression of organizing it, manifesting it. It will be an aspect of the Mahasaraswati temperament which comes here. So you may see here Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahasaraswati action in the aspect of action. These are all facets or the fourfold powers of the soul which have been developed to whatever degree in the past. And what is important is that this is brought forward as a capacity. And then he says, capacity of character. We have an example here in the ashram. We have many examples in the ashram of people who had, I mentioned last time, something of royalty or something of exceptional leadership. Somebody, I gave the example, who was general in some past events. And that sense of authority or royalty was embedded in the character. A few examples of people who were royal in character, although nothing in the present life had anything to do with a role of royalty. They were always in a position of service, taking care of things and people. But in their interactions with people, there was always this sense of a quiet, dignified, the word skips me, but chivalry would be closer to that, and royalty, which came with the position that would have been developed in that life. And that character was deep in the very nature of the personality. And then he gives a very interesting requirement, manifold response to the universe. If you look at it from the soul's perspective, every time that you enter the birth, what are you entering? From a state of withdrawal from action in deep rest, and then returning to enter the universe. And entering the physical universe, it's as if you are faced with the challenges of all the other levels. You could have entered only in the mental part of the worlds and had a limited experience. But entering the physical world means everything here is embedded. And what are you facing? The whole universe. And what's the soul's journey? Wandering through the experiences that the universe throws at you. And as it wanders, utilizing those experiences for its growth and for its service to the divine unfolding or manifestation in the universe. And that's all there is to it. Growth of your consciousness, growth of the divine consciousness in the world. In what? The domain is the universe. And the things thrown by the universe are as if opportunities or challenges. What kind of response can you give to those challenges? If you look at a less developed personality, it may look at this and feel overwhelmed and choose to narrow itself to a very small band of possible response and engagement. Or a more developed personality in a larger capacity will accept all the challenges thrown in, or a large part of them, and be able to respond appropriately to each situation that comes. And such people will naturally take up a role which has a significant influence in human affairs. It's as if you can throw anything at them and they will find a way to respond and appropriately as necessary for that situation. So this is the capacity which is developed to respond to the universe, but a manifold, multifaceted, rich response. So I'll review this phrase. The more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new birth. Now all of these have been developed, they are brought forward and harmonized so that they work as one personality, not many pieces. The greater, and then the last fourth, the more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. And this is something very interesting. If you look into yourself, you will, and if you're asked to describe what are all the different facets of your personality, you may say, somebody may say, oh, I am a painter, I am a musician, there's the part of me that loves this play of music. I may not be skilled in this lifetime, that doesn't matter, but what are the facets? Oh, I'm an adventurer, I'm a scientist, I'm inquisitive, I have this fascination with mountains, I have this fascination with flowers, whatever specific aspect. Each of these may be a facet of personality developed across lives. How many richly formed personalities are there within you? And some of these may be very specialized. They may have to deal with things of the mind. For example, in the mental personality, I may be a scientist with a very mechanistic exploration. Or I may be a computer programmer which is completely non-mechanical in its expression. Or in my mind, I may be a philosopher, and it would be a different aspect. So within the mental, there are facets of personality. Within the vital nature, again, there are facets of personality. Strong leadership, or simply lone adventurer, or networker, or in the subtle physical also. It's a very important suggestion here, that at the level of the physical body, the things that you develop primarily are held in the deeper layers of the physical, what Sri Aurobindo calls the subtle physical or inner physical. And that's where you build certain facets of personality. In fact, these facets can also influence the form of your body when the personality takes birth. Occasionally you will see there is in the family a strong resemblance across everybody, and one child stands out to be completely different in personality. And often it's because the soul can bring an element of the physical consciousness developed and imprint that into the fetus and into the physical form also. But there are elements like this of skills in the physical body or turn of the physical consciousness which also form distinct personalities. All of these can be brought forward. So the more numerous the veiled personalities that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. Now it's not enough that you've had many, it's that many can be brought forward now and combined. So this makes for the last characteristic. I'm reminded of an interesting example, and this is from Sri Aurobindo's Record of Yoga. These were diary notes that he was making. And as part of those papers, there are a series of papers where he, for a while, experimented with automatic writing. And his conclusions are interesting to notice also, but just that during the automatic writing experiments, the people would gather around him and they would pose a question and there would be a message that would come. And one of the messages which was coming from a certain entity, it was speaking of the passage between lives and the personalities that the soul can bring forward. And as it was being asked about specific individuals, it would describe, oh, so-and-so has so many personalities. And then somebody asked, what about the mother? And its response was, she has so many personalities, more than 300 personalities. And I believe it was during one such thing that the mother said no, and then the whole thing stopped. But what was interesting was the number which was given to others was 12, 20, and then when it came to the mother, it was 300. It was something very big. Now, I would not give too much importance to the specifics of the number, but that there was this enormously rich, 10 times more or 20 times more than a normal person. And that shows the richness of what was brought forward. Now, the more rich possibilities are brought forward, the more Sri Aurobindo says we are now ready to complete this phase of evolution. The greater and more opulent, you see all the work done leading to the richness, will be the personality and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. For all of us present here, we have to take this as relevant for us. We would not be here otherwise. If the soul had a choice to, and it recognized the need for developing further personalities or facets of its exploration, it would take a life which had that specific focus. That it has chosen a life where it is attracted to a broad, not only spiritual development, but a large fulfillment of the spiritual potential, is itself a sign that we are ready for the leap in evolution. Such a complexity and gathering up of many personalities in one person can be a sign of a very advanced stage of the individual's evolution, when there is a strong central being that holds all together and works towards harmonization and integration of the whole many-sided movement of the nature. Now, again, when we say many, the many can be relative, but the point is, all those many are brought together. But he says, it suggests also that there is a strong central being. Now, Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary here, central being, is that aspect of the self which presides over the development of the soul's evolution. It is the self, the one self. There is only one self. But the one self turns to support this line of evolution for this soul, that line of evolution for another soul. But the same self supporting, standing behind, presiding over, is what Sri Aurobindo refers to as central being. It's an aspect that it puts forward, or which is present, to support the soul that is put forward in its journey of evolution. And each of these different outlooks of the self is as if supporting the journey. The station of the central being is above the head, where the individual consciousness opens to the cosmic, and from there it holds together the whole personality and presides over the journey across lives. When there is a rich, multifaceted personality, it is the central being which holds it all together. And this, what he discusses here, is at advanced stage of the individual's evolution where the central being is strong. Not only it holds together all these, but works to integrate all these. In practice, for many of us, if there is this process of integration ongoing, you will find in your life complex challenges thrown your way. Your life is not simple. You have to face many different, often conflicting demands or influences. And you have to work somehow to synthesize, harmonize these in your nature to be able to deal with them seamlessly as one person. And that's generally a sign that there is a process of integration being developed. But then he explains, but this opulent taking up of the past would not be a repetition of personality. It would be a new formation and large consummation, brings to fulfillment all these efforts of the past. It is not as a machinery for the persistent renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality that rebirth exists, but as a means for the evolution of the spiritual being in nature. Why is there this whole process of rebirth? Why did nature choose? She could have had one personality going on and on and on and on, potentially possible. We have in nature, there are certain creatures, marine creatures, which have effectively, they are immortal. There are other mammalian creatures, small ones, which effectively do not age. And these which are immortal, you can actually try to kill them, somehow they survive, they grow, they just continue. In principle, nature could have built life forms so that we continue for a long time. And there's a rationale behind it. What would be the use of having an unchanging personality stuck in a narrow experience? And so nature has made for this process of rebirth, for the evolution of the spiritual being, the whole focus is the soul which is taking on these personalities for its growth. And it is for this purpose that the whole framework of rebirth is there. It is not for renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality. Now, this is a very important idea because we will come back to it a little later. For our purpose, as we discussed last time, we want to be able to create a continuity of effort, of spiritual effort, and take it across lives. Not have to forget when we take birth again and restart all over again. Can we not recall or draw consciously forward all the benefits of the past spiritual efforts so that they are present now? Can we not prolong this conscious effort of what we build in this lifetime into the next? So in some sense you see here a contradiction of purpose. Nature does not want you to extend your current limited personality. Your soul does not want to have that. And yet, if the soul has to grow, there comes a stage where the soul would need to be able to retain as completely as possible what is required for the new births without needing to forget and rebuild. How this is going to be resolved, we will see as we go along with the rest of the chapter. But Sri Aurobindo now brings us to another important idea. What is the wrong idea that we have about rebirth and its role? And there's a whole paragraph around this. And it is only so that we remove that idea once and for all. And then what is it that can be retained will be the next step. And we will see how it applies for us today. So we take the next paragraph now. It becomes at once evident that in this plan of rebirth, the false importance which our mind attaches to the memory of past lives disappears altogether. Now we have this idea, oh, I was so and so, or someone was so and so in the past life. I've had people come occasionally and say something, you know, you were somebody in your past life. I said, yes, and you were also somebody in your past life. So what? And someone says, aren't you curious what you were or what you were doing? And the normal tendency is, oh yeah, it would be. For what? How will it change what you're doing now? Well, it might be interesting to remember that I was X, Y, Z. And of course the fantasies that typically come up will be some famous personality. And what are you drawing that idea for? To feel important. But other than that, if you actually began to look back at your past lives, what does the soul retain? To take a very extreme example, not the food you had for breakfast. What relevance does it have? Not even elements of the culture or lifestyle of that period. All of us would have had lives where we drew water from the river or from the well. How did it help you? Unless that was a specific purpose in your life itself, but otherwise it has no value. What is it that you would bother to remember or recall for the purpose of this present life? The things which represent the progress of consciousness, the growth of the spiritual nourishment for the soul. The three words Sri Aurobindo draws on the Indian tradition for what the soul finds as nourishment. Satyam, Shivam and Sundaram. Satyam, the truth. Shivam, the sacred, the auspicious, the good. Sundaram is the beautiful. Beautiful not just in physical terms, but on all levels. There's a beauty of emotions. There's a beauty of thought. And into that, a sense of sacredness in the emotions, the sacredness in the thoughts or in your actions. And when that sacred thought, emotion or action is dedicated to serving something which is true, to spreading the good and the beautiful of the divine presence, things which lead to that growth, those are the things you will recall. So if actually you were to turn back, you would remember, for example, one of the lives in which the whole life was dedicated to serving a group of people who loved the divine. And you spent all your time in remembrance, in the joy of service to the divine. The specifics of what you did will not matter, but that sense of a total dedication and joy of service to the divine, that would remain. Yes, elements of fragments where the soul's influence came strongly forward would be there as a few fleeting images, but that's about all. All the rest, what you ate, whether you chewed 20 times, whether you had stomach upset because of the bad food, no relevance at all gone. If you review your current life from this perspective, how much of what you do today will you actually find worthwhile to carry over into the next? It's a very provocative question. Introspect on this, and you'll suddenly discover 90% of what we do, 90% of the things we consider important that we chase after will not matter. It'll make no difference to you when you look back and say, what do I want to take from here? And the few things which for you are important, consider how little time or importance you give to them. You know it's important for you, but how much importance are you able to give to it? Because all the rest is cluttering your time and your attention. And it's worth reviewing and then reprioritizing. So when the question comes of past births, we realize that the false importance our mind attaches to the memory of past lives disappears altogether, because what is relevant for this personality that you have today and what's relevant for the soul in its evolution? Very little. And what is already there. That's all you need. The specifics are not important. If indeed rebirth were governed by a system of rewards and punishment, if life's whole intention were to teach the embodied spirit to be good and moral, that's the idea we normally have. Supposing that is the intention in the dispensation of karma, and it is not what it looks like in this presentation of it, a mechanical law of recompense and retribution without any reformatory meaning or purpose, then there is evidently a great stupidity and injustice in denying to the mind in its new incarnation all memory of its past births and actions. It's a long sentence, but what he is saying basically is this. We won't go too much in detail of the nuances, but basically, if the whole purpose was to be good and to suffer the good and bad consequences of karma for your being good or bad in your past, then it would be great injustice that you don't remember what you did. You see, you're suffering in some situation in life today, and someone will say, oh, that's because of your past bad karmas. You caused suffering to others and now you're suffering now. But I don't remember. Why are you making me suffer for something which I don't remember? Why do you deny me the memory? At least if I remembered what I did, then I could correct for it now. Why deny that opportunity? Precisely because that's not the point of the rebirths. To remember the past for the purpose of moral development or for reward and punishment, you would require continuing. But if that's not the purpose, what happens? He says, let's continue. For it deprives the reborn being of all chance to realize why he is rewarded and punished, or to get any advantage from the lesson of the profitableness of virtue and the unprofitableness of sin vouchsafed to him or inflicted on him. Even since life seems often to teach the opposite lesson, for he sees the good suffer for their goodness and the wicked prosper for their wickedness, he is rather likely to conclude in this perverse sense, because he has not the memory of an assured and constant result of experience, which would show him that the suffering of the good man was due to his past wickedness, and the prosperity of the sinner due to the splendors of his past virtues, so that virtue is the best policy in the long run for any reasonable and prudent soul entering into this dispensable of nature. Now, I'm not going to go into detail. Simply the summary of it is this. If you don't have this memory, you cannot conclude that you should be good or you should avoid bad. In fact, if you see life, you will see mostly good people are being punished for their goodness Bad people are getting a lot of benefit for their wickedness. So you might even conclude it's better to be wicked because then you benefit more. But all of this logic and thinking is very quickly corrected when we recognize that the purpose of the evolution is not in becoming good or bad, but in the growth of the soul. And so this is what he brings us to. It might be said that the psychic being within remembers. Now there are many arguments placed to justify this idea of good and bad and moral growth. Someone, the soul remembers, you may not remember, well, you have to suffer, but the soul understands. But such a secret memory would seem to have little effect or value on the surface. Or it may be said that it realizes what has happened and learns its lesson when it reviews and assimilates its experiences after issuing from the body. So even there are traditions which say, at the time of death you'll look back and then you will understand why it happened. But this intermittent memory does not very apparently help in the next birth. For most of us persist in sin and error and show no tangible sign of having profited by the teaching of our past experience. So we continue the same thing, it's not helping us. But, now if we change our perspective, but if constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning, and the building of a new personality in a new birth is the method, then any persistent or complete memory of the past life or lives might be a chain and a serious obstacle. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupations, and a tremendous burden hampering the free development of the new personality and its formulation of new experience. Now, if we shift the perspective and we realize the whole point of the rebirth is for the constant development of being by developing cosmic experience, that's the meaning of your birth, and the building of a new personality in a new birth is the method of this development. Now suddenly the picture changes. For this purpose, any memory of the past life will actually become a chain. It will pull you back. It will prevent you from the new development and experience. And he lists what are the things which will come in the way. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupation. Now, three things. Your temperament is the tendency of your personality. Now, as we saw some examples earlier, the heroic tendency to rush into action would be a problem if now your role is completely different. Or the tendency to quietude and introspection would be an error if your role demanded that heroic action. But that memory of it would actually bring back all that tendency. Or character. In your character, there's a tendency to get upset, to get angry, to pick on little things. I don't know if you have seen this, but it's an example that comes to mind. Often we see in human personality certain types who are picking on little things. Anything you show, rather than enjoying the whole, they'll pick, oh, that's not okay, this is not okay, that's not. And you would wonder, hey, I didn't even notice that, I was enjoying the whole thing so much. Very often you'll find people who have been accountants or whose work in life was accounting, where you have to pick on little commas, little numbers, totals not matching. In your total of the year, there is a 5 rupee missing, and trace back to the one bill which was missed by that one person 6 months ago. To trace back little details and to bring them into. But the whole focus is looking for flaws. Now this can actually shape the character to such a degree that now they're out of that job, they're living a normal life, but that habit of the mind to pick, to criticize little things and miss the whole joy of the whole, because the mind was so fixed. Character is nothing but the personality which has got rigidified in tendencies. Into this we may throw certain kinds of vices. If you had in the past a strong vice, even an addiction of some kind, let's say to smoking, and you were fighting, unable to free yourself from the addiction, the memory of that returning will bring with it the full force of the addiction. And imagine now, as a young child, you take new birth, and the memory of that comes with this force. What do? And you're fighting it all over again. What's the point of it? And then preoccupations. I may have spent an entire life doing something which I enjoy very much, let's say painting. And now I take a new personality, but how can I let go of my favorite pastime of painting? You're denying me in this new life pattern that comfort or that joy, and it binds you. So anything like this continuing would be, he says, a serious obstacle and a chain which holds you back. A clear and detailed memory of past lives, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience. Now, occasionally, there are cases where a child is born and it says, I don't belong here, my family is in such and such a village, names them, he goes there and recognizes people. Now, what do? That family cannot relate to this 5-year-old child as their grandfather. It's not convenient, it's very disorienting. And this new family thought they had their child and he says he's not theirs. What do? It completely disbalances all the normal human relationships possible. But fortunately, even in those cases, after a few years, the memory fades. And you should ask yourself why. In the few cases where the memories are carried over, they fade rapidly, generally around the age of 3 or 4. Why? Because that's the time when the surface personality of the emotions is developing and the soul puts out an imprint to erase what's coming in the way. If at all it is carried over, it is an aberration. And we have many cases in the ashram where reports of such memory were given to the mother, and the mother was serious and she said that's not good, and she intervened and the memory was gone immediately. And because of this reason, it interferes. For it would bind the reborn being to a useless repetition or a compulsory continuation of his surface past. It's not the soul's past, it is the surface past. And stand heavily in the way of his bringing out new possibilities from the depths of the spirit. If indeed a mental learning of things were the heart of the matter, if that were the process of our development, memory would have a great importance. So if the goal was development of the mental personality, not the soul, then of course you want to carry over that. But what happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being, a creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. In this process, conscious memory is of no importance. Now these 2 sentences are extremely important. He's describing what's actually happening, where is the growth taking place and how. It's not the mental, obviously. But what is it that is absorbing the growth? What happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. Who is developing? Not the surface personality, but soul personality. What does that mean? So surface personality is the particular bundle of thinking, habits, reactions of emotions and thoughts and even physical instincts which form the personality, which rigidify into character. But what is inside? Now, if we all start a process of introspection, and I ask you to tell me, what kind of a person are you truly, not the way people know you, but the way you know yourself within, or the way your best friend in life, who truly knows you, would describe you. What kind of a person are you there? And now suddenly you'll have a very different description. You'll say, I'm actually a sensitive person. I'm very loving. I'm caring. I want people to be happy. I want to be of help. And all the things you will describe will be good soul qualities or soul tendencies. And then after that, in inner introspection, I'm artistic, I'm creative, I'm kind. You will say, but because I am sensitive, I get upset when somebody does this. Because I am artistic and I enjoy beauty, I get angry when somebody doesn't keep things neatly. And the but is important. The surface personality reacts and has patterns which are completely contrary to the inner. And sometimes the surface reaction is because of the contrast with the inner. I want my space to be happy and joyous. And I find the assault of life to be overwhelming, and I shrink and I push back hard to protect my sensitivity. You see, a lot of little children who are sensitive in the heart will become extremely rebellious when their parents impose upon them. Too much domination, too much imposition, not enough free space to unfold your own soul's joys and aspirations. And the child becomes rebellious to a degree where everything is no, no, no. And the same child taken out of that space and put in a free space and just allowed to flower begins to breathe. And then little by little, the deeper parts of the personality begin to deploy. And all of us face this to different degrees, if nothing else from life, if not from people around us. We feel ourselves overwhelmed and we create these layers to protect. So we recognize here already two layers of personality. There is this personality which you will say, look up my LinkedIn profile. I was manager of this, I was assistant of that, that's your career, it's not your personality. Okay, what's your personality? I like this, I don't like that, I get angry with this, I'm happy with that, I enjoy reading books, I enjoy climbing mountains. No, that's not you. What are you? And now you go a layer deeper within and you find all these beautiful things. They are the first reflection you can access of the soul's personality. But it's still a reflection, it's not the soul's personality. Behind that, deep within, in the stillness of your heart, is the actual soul's presence and the particular personality that it has formed. So what is growing? He says, what happens is growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature, the soul's nature, by an assimilation into our substance of being. How does the nature, inner nature, grow? Well, let's look at what's happening externally when your nature is growing. Over the last 5 years, maybe I've learned the skill of playing piano. Over the last 10 years, I have learned the skill of, let's say, my intellectual powers of argumentation or discourse or presentation. Over the last 20 years, my body has developed in its capacities. I have become stronger, more agile and more skillful in juggling and doing cartwheels. Now all of this would be development of your nature on the surface. You shed the body, a bulk of this just drops with that. What would remain in you, again we look back at an example, when you went through your training in school and all that you studied of mathematics or geography or history or whatever else that you specialized in, what remains of it? This is a question I often ask to children when they have just finished an exam in school or college. They finish their exam and I meet them a week or two later and I ask, what do you remember? And their response is, nothing. And they smile. What a relief to remember nothing of it. And yet something stays. You are changed by the very fact that you prepared so much junk information and knowledge, so much junk, but something remains as an imprint, a sense of history, a sense of what happens in earth processes, a sense of familiarity with numbers and a confidence of being able to manipulate them to some degree. You see, what's being retained is like a broad comfort and skill at a very essential level. And having been through that, now you know you can enter in life And although you may have difficulties, you know that you have what you need to be able to deal with it. A child who has grown up in a space of very few people, in a village, let's say, of 20 or 30 people, now suddenly being brought into the city will be overwhelmed by the number of people, simply the sheer numbers. And you feel suffocated. But after having been in it for about a year or two and developed the skills of navigating around the city, taking the public transports, interacting with strangers, now he's absorbed in his personality the skill of being in a complex, crowded space. And you could then take him to a completely new city and he'll feel comfortable. Oh yes, I can manage. It's new, but I will learn. He has that confidence. So what you see absorbed is something at a very essential level, but which is building in the personality a capacity and a familiarity and an essential skill, not the specifics. So if I've played the harmonium and you take me to the piano, I can say, yes, I am sure within a few months I will pick up this. Why? Because there's a commonality of the essential skill. If you take me to play the flute, the fingering is completely different, and yet the familiarity with the sense of tones and the rhythms in which I play out the tones, that is there as an essential skill. So the flute will take me now maybe 3 months to master instead of 3 years to master. So this is the sense you have of the growth taking place at the deeper layers of personality, and it is on this level that the soul absorbs. How? What does it absorb? Growth of the nature by assimilation into our substance of being. I have become a different person in my substance. This shift in the character, quality, consciousness in substance is the growth taking place, not the informational content. So you learned in your examination all those facts of names in history, you regurgitated for the exam, 2 weeks later you've forgotten everything. The facts are gone, but the substance in the mind of the sense of history, the sense of time, the sense of cycles of events and their influences as they impact and form modern society, the general sense of it is retained in your mind. And deeper and deeper levels, the sense of familiarity with things will not come through the reading of history, but of watching movies, of going into spaces, of interacting with people. That will lead to that shift in the substance and the growth in the substance. I worked for 2 years, let's say, in China, for 3 years in Russia, for 2 years in Finland, and for 5 years in South America. I'm actually quoting somebody who went through a passage like that in his business leadership. And he says, I have a good sense of the feel of humanity. Where is this good sense of the feel of humanity held in him? Not in the mind's memory. You could erase the memory, he will still be the person that he is. He can meet any situation with confidence and adapt to any complex cultural variation. It's held at some deeper level, more essential. And it is from that essential level that it is absorbed into the psychic being as a substantial change of the personality. So let's reread this very brief sentence. What happens is a growth of the soul's personality, of the soul personality, and the growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. I'll give another example. You have been, let's say, to meetings where you met many people, or you went on a holiday to a new space. And immediately as you come back, if somebody asks you, well, how was it? You will say it was exciting, it was nice. What did you learn? And if you're a deep person, you will say, I'm still processing it. I'm still assimilating. I'm still absorbing the impact of that rich experience. How long does it take you? You'll notice sometimes days, sometimes weeks. You come back into your normal life, you're sucked into routine, but then a weekend, when you're free, you sit back and spontaneously your mind goes back to those experiences and something begins to deeply absorb, assimilate, and settle into you, shaping from inside out And maybe a month or two later, you will say, oh yes, now I can look back, and that was such an enriching experience. I have grown as a person. I am a different person. In what way? You'll still find it difficult to get words to describe it, but you can feel it. That is the change in substance of consciousness, of the personality of the soul. So he uses not soul's personality, but soul-personality, soul as personality. Into that the substantial change, the creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. Now this is the next phrase. Creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. Everything done, the essential result of it is absorbed. How? Two words. Creative and effective absorption. If you read casually, you will gloss over these words and not realize how important they are. What is creative absorption? What you absorb creates something new within you. You become something more. You become even someone else. Having been through that period of intensive struggle, I have now come out of it, that passage is over, I have become a new person. That creative absorption. What is absorbed is not simply added on, it creates something new which was not there before. And effective absorption means what is absorbed now becomes effective in your life. Having been through that intense training, my whole personality now faces problems of life differently. My whole outlook to life has changed and I respond to situations differently. So now I'll reread the full sentence. What happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. A creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. And because it's substance of being, it is what you are. You could erase all the memories, you would still be the same person. And this is something very important which we're going to see shortly, why it's important. In fact, when you look back at your life, especially if you've been in the body for long enough, memories of your childhood have mostly faded. Memories of your teenage have begun to fade or have become irrelevant. Even memories of what happened maybe 10 years or 20 years ago are beginning to fade. And if somehow there was a sudden intervention and all memories until today were erased, you would still be you because that's your being. The whole imprint of the consciousness that is your personality. And it is this which now remains at the level of the soul. In this process, a conscious memory is of no importance. You could erase everything, it does not matter, because what is held is at the level of substance of being, what you become as a result of those experiences. He gives an example now. As the tree grows by a subconscious or inconscient assimilation of action of sun and rain and wind, and absorption of earth elements, so the being grows by subliminal or intraconscient assimilation and absorption of its results of past becoming and an output of potentialities of future becoming. So let's look at the example of the tree, and then the things he speaks of it will be so obvious in us. How does the tree grow? It does not think of what I will do. It is constantly responding to the things acting upon it, sun, rain and wind. And how is it responding? Not consciously, oh, today the sun is hot, tomorrow I must prepare for the heat. It is subconscious. It feels the heat and the heat bakes into the cells the habit of a different response. It becomes something different because of the sun's heat. The same tree now taken into a colder climate, it feels the impact of the cold and creates within the cell or responds within the cell subconsciously a response, and it becomes now the new response, the new relationship. So subconscious or inconscient assimilation of action of sun, rain and wind. Now to such a degree that inside the rhythm of the tree life, it even knows the seasonal response. Now the warmth is coming, I have to start sprouting leaves. Unconscious response. Suddenly the warmth drops and the cold hits. The leaves drop. It goes back into half sleep. Again the warmth comes. Again it starts. Now this happens in the present phase because in many cases you find the climate fluctuates very unsteadily. All in the last 20 years and for very interesting reasons. But where it has happened, we saw this for example in Punjab. The cold ended, the winter ended, the warmth started prematurely, 2 months in advance. As it came up, the leaves began to sprout and suddenly the cold hit, it dropped the leaves. Again the warmth came up, again it sprouted 3 times. And the tree must have been confused. But in the being it has developed this relationship. Warmth comes, I grow. Cold comes, I go to sleep. And it's set in the rhythm somewhere. Some of these relationships are so deep subconsciously that you cannot even explain how they know. So you look at shells. In the sea, there are shells which open during high tide and then they close during low tide because the food comes during high tide and then it has to protect itself during low tide. Now these shells are synchronized to the local tides. Well, how do they know the water is rising? We don't quite understand, but let's say there is some mechanism. You take those shells out from the beach, take them inland at the top of a mountain, put them in an aquarium. So for a few days they continue their cycle of opening and closing as they were in the earlier location. Then there's a kind of a hesitation, something happens, they are confused, and after a few days they get back to a new cycle, synchronized to the tides that would be at that location if there was an ocean there. Amazing. They're aligning themselves to something in relation to the moon. At what level? They are not conscious. Even we are not conscious of where the moon is. And yet at a deep subconscious level, where our energies individually are connected to the entire cosmos, we are plugging into or we are influenced by all the rhythms of the cosmos, including gigantic rhythms which span thousands of years, are influencing us even as the daily cycle of the sun influences us, and the moon, and Jupiter, and other planets. And they're acting at some deep subliminal subconscious level to the extent that the form and expression of the movement of this shell is actually taking place on top of a mountain as if there was an ocean there. All this is happening in the tree. And the absorption of earth elements, which makes for its substance. In the same way, the being grows by a subliminal or intraconscient assimilation and absorption of its results. Now here, he is not using the word subconscient or inconscient. You see, the tree as a being is fundamentally not mental and not vital. It is primarily physical and with a nervous physical development in evolution. An animal would have elements of emotional or limited mental development. In the human being, we have a complex mental personality, and the inner being is also much more evolved and awake. But where is the assimilation taking place? Not in the surface personality, at the subliminal, at the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical. The parts of mind which we are not conscious of. Take an example again. You went through, let's say, a very difficult passage of your life, and we have all been through such things. You look back at it immediately after the passage, you say, oh, I'm relieved, I'm out of it. That's all your mind is concerned with. But after 2 or 3 years, you look back at it, and then you say, oh yeah, now that I look back, I grew so much through that passage that today I am stronger, more mature, more capable, more skilled, whatever form it takes. And I'm glad it happened. If not for that, I couldn't be what I am today. At what level in your personality did you actually change yourself because of those experiences? Nowhere consciously. In fact, it took you a while to look back after 3 years to say, I have changed because of that. It happened at an inner level, subliminal. Now, the framework of personality Sri Aurobindo maps out. There is the surface personality, surface mind, which is I am thinking, I remember. surface emotions and this gross physical body. Behind that is an inner mind in which there is access literally to all knowledge because it connects to the whole universe. It is on those inner levels, subliminal, that the real assimilation is taking place. Similarly, the inner vital, which has deeper sensitivities, it senses things about people. You walk into a room, before your mind has looked at people, you've already sensed, the mood here is tense. And that was picked up by the inner vital and brought forward into the surface to make you aware, be careful, you're heading for trouble. And similar thing happens at an inner physical, where you're not conscious of, but imprints remain. What keeps the shape of the hand, for example? What keeps the scar when all the tissue is being replaced every 6 or 7 years? A memory which is held in the physical consciousness at an inner level. And if you can erase that memory, the scar will vanish. So the real assimilation is taking place on those layers of which we are not conscious, but which are conscious of us. They even help us. For example, you have a problem, you don't know how to solve it. You think about it, and then you go to sleep, you wake up, and you have a solution. What happened during sleep was your surface thinking mind was shut for a while. The inner mind said, you're worried about this, here's the solution. But there's a gap between the two. So as long as you were busy thinking, it couldn't pop out the solution. When you went to sleep and you woke up, your mind was fresh and the solution could pop out and register. Now, if you could consciously train your mind to become silent, you can actually access that inner layer and draw out from it insights. But because there's a gap, you do not consciously enter it. You only enter in some unusual states, or you learn to enter it by deep meditation. By entering consciously into your deeper layers and accessing those parts which currently are subliminal but not unconscious. So it is on those levels that this is taking place. So he uses two different words here. The being grows by subliminal assimilation and absorption, or intraconscient assimilation and absorption. Intraconscient meaning inside the consciousness the stuff is happening, which is not seen or felt on the surface. Of the results of past becoming and an output of potentialities of future becoming. So at that deeper level, all the past things are held or assimilated, which have happened in this life, and elements of the previous which are kept. And it is here also that the shaping is taking place for the future to come. As an example, a child who is still an early teenage, can you say what kind of a personality will be developed when he grows into full teenage? Broad tendencies only. But sometimes it is surprising, once they come into teenage, the whole body shape is so different you could not have anticipated, but the personality has vitality which you could not have seen. A very meek and demure child at the age of 10, and suddenly at the age of 18 he is this dynamic, powerful person. Could you have seen that? Very unlikely, as long as you saw the surface. But if you are able to see inside, on these inner levels, there's a whole preparation for energy being gathered and being developed to be put forward when the body is able to contain it. I've seen in many cases it happens for highly, richly developed souls, that there are all these potentialities waiting to be deployed, but the personality is not strong or stable enough into which to deploy it. And it's waiting. Or sometimes in a hurry, it starts pushing these things forward and the personality gets a little overwhelmed. I want to do so much, but I can't. My body can't contain it. My emotional nature is still immature. My mind is not fully formed. How do I deploy? And you're struggling with this need of the inner being to bring forward quickly. So all this is happening on those levels, but the whole goal is potentialities of future becoming. The law that deprives us of the memory of past lives is a law of cosmic wisdom and serves, not disserves, its evolutionary purpose. So having recognized this, he now comes to the question of what is the relevance of those memories and what role they play on different levels, or what the soul brings forward. the example he takes up, which we will take up next time in the next paragraph, how exactly in the transition the retention takes place as well as the loss. Now, very obviously, if you have shed a body and taken up a new body with a completely new brain, with new brain cells, everything to do with what was stored in the physical brain would naturally be lost, cannot be carried over. But if content of it at an essential level is absorbed by the soul, it can be reinfused into the new physical brain, or new physical body, or the new sheath of vitality or of mind. So in this yogic framework, we have to see three bodies that the soul will shed and take back. Having shed the physical body, the vital body is also dissolved, and the mental body, retaining now in the soul only the overall impressions from all these three. And now when taking a new birth, again gathering material for a new mental body, infusing into it, gathering material for a new vital body, infusing into it, and then gathering the substance of the physical body, which is half formed or being formed or has just taken birth, and then infusing what it can into it. So what are the mechanism of dissolution and bringing forward is discussed, and he will end that paragraph with what happens when memories are retained, what kind of memories are retained, how much of that can be made relevant, and in what way it can be accessed by a turn within into the inner subliminal ranges, and what could be found there. And this will complete our understanding of the relationship between person and personality. And then will come this larger discussion of, in the spiritual evolution, how do we carry forward that which is relevant? So this is all to place in context what we have studied today. And looking back, the thing to recall is not to give importance to memories of past lives. What is relevant for you is already present within as an essential soul imprint. What you have brought as a soul in this lifetime is a rich range of possibilities which are being worked upon to be integrated in preparation for the next step in evolution. And so what is important is what we do with what we have brought forward. And if we can consciously create in our immediate space of life a wider and richer environment for bringing forward these possibilities and developing them, it will be good. It will be helpful. And if all the effort we make can be integrated with the soul's aspiration, then everything we'll do will become relevant for the larger evolution and taken into the next life. To the extent that it is not integrated with the soul's aspiration, well, those activities or skills developed will be useful for a while, but eventually to be shed as we shed the personality in preparation to take on a new personality. Review what is important. Review what you do in life which is worthwhile truly to carry, and give it greater time and energy. Over time, just thinking about it, becoming conscious, will lead to many rearrangements and realignments of priorities, until, as part of the cultivation of our spiritual life, we will bring in every single thing we do in the day into the framework of the life's purpose and the soul's aspiration. It is at that point that our life will have effectively put into practice the principle of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga, when everything in life is included in the scope of the soul's evolution and done for that purpose as a consecration to the divine, or as a way of fulfilling and manifesting the divine possibilities in us and in the world. Then our life will be most complete, and we will have something rich in growth to take forward and integrate with all the work done in the past. And this we can take as our reference for the transition that we're about to have, symbolic though, of a new year, day after tomorrow. Every life, or even within a life, we go through passages and phases where we have finished with a phase of life and we begin a new phase. Rather than waiting to take a whole new birth, what if we are able to do that every year, or at least every few years? And it is in this sense that we can prepare ourselves for the new year. Consider, and all this detailed description is helpful for that, consider all the gathering of growth of the past 1 year. Bring forward all that is essential in terms of growth of your being and your deeper personality. Set aside all the details of events. You got upset with somebody insulted you, somebody betrayed you, doesn't matter. What matters is what you've grown from it. And when you start your new year, let it be for you like a new birth. Bring forward the new fresh personality, looking at all of life as a new beginning. Like a child. Everything is possible, everything is before you. Recreate, reform your life and your relationships. It does not matter that this person was nasty last year. It's a new birth and a new life. I am equally loving and kind to everybody. Of course, the essential memory remains, this fellow is unreliable, stay within limits. But you don't stop loving, you don't stop caring, you don't stop being yourself as you would as a newborn child. Fresh, free, joyous in exploration of your life journey. So we can consciously choose to make, to whatever degree, this transition, using the new year as a point of birth, or your birthday as a point of birth, but whatever, does not matter. What day it is does not matter. It's the Gregorian calendar or it's the Hindu calendar or any other calendar. The day is not important. The fact that we've all, as a humanity, pretty much settled on this as a symbolic transition gives to it a certain force, and we can use it as an occasion for a new birth. It's in this sense that the mother used to have, in the early days, a special meditation at midnight on the new year. Later that was not possible, so she would just give a message for the new year. And the goal was to be able to have practically a new birth and a new beginning afresh. We can meditate on this for a few minutes, and we'll continue the text next Sunday at 6 o'clock.